5, right?
Week 5. Yes. Better
We're
be.
over halfway done.
Yes. Midnight Sun, 60%. Twilight, who knows? Because I'm reading a paper book. It's unknowable.
I think we're at like 50. I don't know. I'm not going to pull it up because that'll mess up my notes. But yeah. Speaking of Midnight Sun, I'm guessing you're unaware of this. It was just announced yesterday. Did you see the news about Midnight Sun?
No.
There's going to be a Netflix animated series based on Midnight Sun.
What does that even mean?
Yeah, I don't know. An animated show that's from Edward's perspective, I guess, and Stephanie Meyer's involved, like, as I think an executive producer. And I was going to text you yesterday. I'm like, no, we should talk about it live on the podcast.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool. Okay. Yeah. And my main thought after reading Midnight Sun from this whole section is what an injustice was done around this conversation of glittering vampires. So an animated series makes sense for that, you know?
Yeah. I know. I think it's interesting with this week with the meadow scene that we get that we don't really get in the movie. We vaguely get it in the movie, but not really. And I watched some like bonus feature crap on the DVD, and it was talking about how like the making them glitter was particularly difficult, like figuring out how to do that. And I'm like, that's probably why, part of the reason why they cut part of the meadow scene, because that's kind of what they're doing. But I think it's a huge injustice how they cut so much of it. Like,
yeah. And even the Twilight perspective versus the glittery sun. Oh man, Midnight Sun. We'll talk about it more. But
I thought that was really interesting and animated.
Yeah, that is.
So
yeah.
And that's specifically that it's Midnight Sun and not Twilight. So
right.
I'm curious.
Right. Huh. Yeah, I wonder if there's, Twilight is quite a polarizing topic, good or bad, depending on who you're talking to. I don't feel like a lot of people take it seriously as a media.
Yeah.
We don't take it seriously as a media, and we're doing a whole friggin' podcast about it. So, the fan base is kind of all over. But yeah, so I wonder if that's part of it, is like the PR side of it, or if it's, who knows?
Also, I was just thinking about like how long-lived Twilight is at this point, because the books came out in, I think 2005 was the first book, and now this is still happening. It's going to be like over 20 years later after the first book was published that there's going to be this animated series released, which is just crazy.
Yeah, that is crazy, especially because animated series can take a lot longer depending on how they're animating it. So
it was just announced yesterday. I saw it on social media and I'm like, is this real? So I did like a Google search to make sure, and I'm like, wow, it is. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Anyway. Cool. All right. Well, should we jump in? This week, I don't know if it's we didn't have an episode last week, so maybe it just felt like the chapters were shorter because there was more time that we were reading, but I felt like it was a shorter section. Or maybe because we only read two chapters of Twilight.
I was going to have a little disclaimer here because I did all the reading as if anticipating that we were recording last week. So I haven't read these in like almost 2 weeks now. So for me, I'm like, I don't even know if I fully remember this stuff. So I'm really bad at remembering what happens in books, but I have lots of notes. So I think it'll be okay. But
great.
Yeah, I think it was maybe felt shorter just because there was a lot of in the 2 chapters we read in Twilight were also in Midnight Sun, and a lot of repeated stuff, some new stuff in some of them, but
yeah, could be. Yeah, it's another dialogue heavy couple chapters, which we've talked about in previous weeks, but I am like, oh yeah, this is why I don't like dual POVs that are like the same things happening, but thankfully this section we get a lot of other context and other like stories in Midnight Sun, so it was not quite as like cringy as some of the other ones that have been dialogue heavy chapters.
Yeah, I feel like we get a lot more background story from Edward that is new, so that's fun. Also, because I don't think we said it, we're covering Midnight Sun 15 through 18 and Twilight 13 and 14.
All right. Chapter 15. Alice and Edward talking visions is how we start off here. Super interesting. Both of us are pretty big fans of Alice. Would you say, who's your favorite character? Is it Carlisle or is it Alice?
Mine's Carlisle. It is. Okay. We don't see as much of Carlisle, though. I do really like Alice, though.
Yeah. Okay, I think Alice is my favorite character. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Anyways, but it's just, anytime Alice is interacting, I just love her. Something about her, like, she's got like an intense energy, but in a way that she's not like, she's still very like sweet and she's right about everything. Like she can see the future, so it like justifies her like intensity. And I kind of like wish that for myself.
Yeah. I like that we learned more about Alice in these chapters, which I think some of them are in Twilight, so I just genuinely didn't remember reading them. I think some are also in Midnight Sun, so are brand new to us.
Right.
But,
we learned a lot about some backstories, particularly Alice and Rosalie and Emmett, a little bit less about Jasper, but
with the beginning of this chapter, with them talking about the vision, we were both wrong last week. We were like, oh, it's probably not the same vision of Bella dying because Edward wouldn't go to the meadow then. Turns out it is about Bella dying. And also just kind of crazy. I never really thought like about her visions, like the fact that she knows the odds of Bella dying or not. I'm like, that's just crazy. Like, and that it's changing and she knows like exactly the percent chance of her dying or not. I'm like, I could not live with that. I would not want to know that much information.
I imagined it like, I don't know if it's like some like old video game or animation thing, but like, where you've got like the dual screen, of like two people playing a video game or something. And then like almost like one is getting like bigger and bigger and the other one is like falling away. I feel like, wow, this hand, if you're watching on YouTube or TikTok, it's really great. Wow, great visual there. Anyways. So that's how I imagined it.
Then it's also interesting. I don't know if it's in this chapter or later on where they talk about like the visualization of her visions and all the threads that come together and how Alice is better at like understanding the threads than Edward is, because Edward can also see them because he can read minds, but he doesn't have as good of an understanding, which I thought was a really cool visual to have about how her visions work.
I really, after this section, I really want an Alice book, like about her like backstory. Like Alice, like you could have it like after everything happens and then she's trying to figure out like her own backstory as like a mystery.
That
would be so good.
I keep thinking, now that I know that there's 2 more books coming, I'm constantly like, oh, they should do a book about that. Like, I think I'll have a note somewhere, I'm pretty sure, in here that I was like, oh, that'd be good, but I could be wrong.
I just want all the side characters. I feel like Sarah J. Maas has kind of ruined me in that way, because then she like gives you a side character that you hate and then all of a sudden you like love them. She does that in multiple series, honestly. The most in the ACOTAR world with Nesta, but I want every author to do that now. That's so fun.
I love that. I think
when you're into a fandom.
Yeah.
Okay, let's jump back into chapter 15 before we just talk about fandoms nonsense.
I'm just looking at my notes. Some of the first notes that I wanted to talk about, which feel free if you have something before this to stop me, but was him talking about how to get rid of like the monster inside him, and that he seriously considered killing himself for
Mm-hmm.
a few
Mm-hmm.
moments.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he
super dark.
Yeah. And he talks about like his family would be capable of doing it, but none of them would. And he specifically talks about Rosalie and how even she wouldn't do it. And he says that she would be that. Excuse me. That he was sure that she would be angry enough to do it, but would not follow through with it. Which I'm like, that checks out. Mm-hmm. And I feel like shows how they're like siblings, because if this wasn't a sibling, Rosalie would definitely just kill him. Like,
yeah, for sure. Where she'd be like, I actually think you're really annoying and you want to die, so great, you know?
But it shows that she actually like cares. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I do have some notes specifically about Alice's visions, just while we're close to the beginning there, which the first one, I thought it was really interesting that Alice was like kind of compelling Edward that he had to go through with it by showing him the visions of Bella being super depressed if he left, and being like, no, you have to risk her suffering either way. And like, this is just part of it. Like, you have to accept it, basically. And it's really like pushing him, which I thought was like super interesting, and also so interesting to note before, you know, we get into New Moon. Spoilers about New Moon is going to be people leaving.
Edward, that's what I also thought. I was like, it's interesting that she's specifically having these visions, and that's why he's like following through with this, but then he ends up leaving for a bit anyway. Like,
yeah.
I also thought, this was my other note that I was going to make that kind of ties into this, that he was already thinking at this point, also spoilers for future books, I think it's New Moon, about going to the Volturi. Like, he talks about that as a possibility. And
and doesn't he here then also allude but that he couldn't tell the Volturi about Bella or something like that? Like, I think
it specifically says, he says, I could think of one place I might go with the power to end the monster very quickly, but doing that would put Bella in danger. So.
Okay. Yeah. So some really interesting foreshadowing there specifically. Also, it's interesting for me, you know, this being my second read through First of Midnight Sun, but so interesting because I know that he leaves, because I know that's the plot of New Moon, right? And I know like them getting back together and Bella going and all this stuff, right? I like remember those rough details. But much of how I did not remember that Edward could read minds, I also have zero memory of why he goes.
Yeah.
So I think that's really interesting. You know, like if you guys listen to previous episodes, you might remember like me being nervous, like every time Bella's been like alone in the woods, I'm like, is this when the other vampires come get her? Because I don't really remember enough, but I remember just enough to be tense about it. So I feel like that was like a foreshadowing moment here too, where I'm like, anyways,
to be honest, I don't remember when it happens. I mean, I have a better idea than you for sure, but because I have not been concerned at all so far. I know it's later, but I don't remember exactly the sequence of events that happens. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah.
Do you have anything more about Alice's visions or anything?
No, my next note after that is just about Alice picking their clothes.
I think I have.
Is that before this?
Before that?
Yeah. You jump in.
Okay. I took note of one specific thing that, it's still talking about like Edward, if he was like trying to get rid of the monster, and it says something about that it was too bad that the treaty wasn't pretty much
Yep.
useless these days. And 3 generations ago, all he would have to do was walk into La Push. But it's a useless idea now, which I feel like confirms our theory we were talking about before, that there are currently no werewolves, which is so interesting.
Yeah. I know. It does. I hope we get some of that. I don't really think we are going to get anything in this book.
Yeah.
About like the backstory, because the werewolves aren't as prominent until New Moon, as far as I can remember. They're like not a thing yet. So
yeah. Well, the only thing I was thinking about this while I was reading, the only thing that I thought that we might get some more on potentially is because when Billy and Jacob like see Edward, and it said something about Billy going off to the reservation and was gonna like talk to some people or whatever, and I'm like, maybe that'll come back somehow to like the Cullens, and is something we don't really see in Twilight, but is something that they would include in Midnight Sun. At least I hope that they do, but I don't know.
Yeah, I'm hopeful. Mostly I just really want like more of this backstory, and to like leave it, like to end the book with us being like, there's now, we know there's no werewolves now, and there are werewolves in the like, I don't know, I hope there's some payoff to it. That's all I'm saying.
I agree.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, yes, I about Alice picking their clothing, I thought was super interesting. One, because I'm a textile nerd. If you didn't know, that's one of the other things I do, is a lot with like needle felting and fair trade sustainable clothing. But yeah, I thought it was so interesting hearing her talking about like the different colors to convey different emotions, and to not like highlight their skin tone too much, and to make them look like always like they kind of fit in, but then also that she like, in the same way they can't drive normal cars, it's like their little indulgence, like that they like all wear designer and like high-end clothes, because she can't just like go to Target to like buy clothes for them. This is like one of her fun immortality rich girl perks, is she gets to buy designer for all her siblings, and like I love that.
I made a note here about wondering about the shirt that she gets, and I was like, is it like magical or some reason? Like, why'd she buy the shirt if she doesn't think Edward would wear it? And then like a couple of pages later, or a page later, there was a sentence saying about how her visions like reached so far that she didn't even fully understand she was like having a vision about this.
Yeah, it's like part her subconscious. So interesting. Interesting. Okay, well, my next notes are around Edward talking about his backstory when Carlisle first turned him, are most of the rest of my notes for the chapter. Okay, great. Well, my first note is Carlisle decorated Edward a Christmas tree. So cute. Literally every note, I want to go back and look, because I have all my notes, and I think every single time we're talking about Carlisle or Esme, I'm just like, I love them.
They're just the best. And I always say that Carlisle's my favorite. I also really like Esme, but I feel like we just don't get much of Esme, considering like all the other characters, and maybe we do more in some of the later books and I don't remember it, but
no. Yeah, I feel like I do, we don't get a lot about Esme, but I really like her because I think like if I was turned, it would be the same, like that her like superpower is just like how passionately and big she like loves everyone. Like I'm like, that would be me as a vampire. Like I wish I could be like Alice, but like, nah, I'd be the mom that adopts all the weirdo teens. Like that's just me to a T.
Yeah.
Like we have, you know, we share a heart that way. Yes. Oh man. Okay, beyond the Christmas tree. I thought it was really interesting that Carlisle kept Edward away from the other vampires, like intentionally at first. And we get a lot of these dynamics about like Carlisle's intentional choice to like, one, start this family because he's lonely, and then like chooses Edward, but also like this intentionality to live separate and different from other vampires. And like it would be weird to learn all this stuff about like all of a sudden you're an immortal and you're a vampire and you want to kill people and like all this stuff, right? Like that's already intense. And then to figure out like you were turned by like this tiny obscurity of a vampire that has this whole other like set of morals and like parameters for how to live, but like you were just born into that, you know? It's like being born into like a cult, for lack of a better like word, and you like don't realize it's like weird how you live until you start meeting other people. Yeah. So I thought that was really, really interesting. A lot of my notes actually follow around that theme for the rest of this chapter.
Yeah, I was like, one of my first things when we were learning more about this was about like Carlisle and before he turned Edward, and about like if we ever learn more about his background and like what made him become a like vegetarian, so called, and like if he was completely alone for a long time, or like, you know, if he interacted with, obviously he interacted with other vampires, but yeah, I want to know more about his story. But that was the note that I had, that I was like, oh, I'd read that book. Like, so,
the backstories. We just want all the backstories.
Yeah, this has made me realize just that I want everyone's backstory, truly everyone's, which I do like that we get more of. And I thought it was interesting here that they introduce what I believe is a completely new coven, and because I don't remember any of those characters' names at all. I don't think they're in the original series, but the Siobhan,
the ones
from Ireland.
Yeah, I don't think so. We should like maybe start a list of the like vampire names we don't recognize, because then once we're like further into the series, because we don't interact with that many vampires initially, but in the later books we do. So
yeah, I think those are the only ones so far we've come across that I'm not sure about, because the ones in Alaska I know we do meet eventually. And I think those are the only, and then they've like alluded to the Volturi, but haven't really said any names. And I guess there's been a lot of groups that they allude to, but don't say any specific names. But
yeah. I just had a moment. Do you remember, was it a big deal to you? Like, I remember all the hype around Dakota Fanning being a Volturi.
Yeah.
Like, I remember that distinctly. I can picture her makeup and her outfit distinctly.
I feel like, I don't know if it was just because, you know, I was like a teenage girl at the time, but I thought she was like the biggest person in Twilight at the time. Now, a lot of these actors I know other things and have done more things, but at the time, I think Dakota Fanning was the only person I had ever seen in anything else besides Twilight, you know?
Yeah. Honestly,
I'm sure that there was other actors who did have more of careers, and I just wasn't watching that stuff. But.
Right, probably. I feel like for me, it was the first time. Like, I had only seen her play a kid before.
Yeah.
Like, it was my first role I ever saw her play an adult as. Yeah, but I remember being shocked when I heard that. Anyways, just a random.
But also, just quick, speaking of Dakota Fanning, I just learned recently, you know, she has the sister Elle Fanning, who's also an actress. Yeah. And apparently, some younger people think that Elle Fanning is the more famous one, and that just blows my mind. I'm like, no, she's just the sister. I do like Elle Fanning, but I was just like, no, Dakota Fanning's the famous one. Like, but anyway.
That's funny. I wonder if like middle-aged people feel that about the Deschanels, like Emily and Zoe Deschanel, you know?
Yeah.
Because like I feel like, what do you like? I don't know. Like if you're into Bones, you're probably really into Emily Deschanel. I don't know what else she's in. She might be in other stuff.
I don't know anything she's in besides Bones.
I've only seen her in Bones and was shocked to find out they were sisters.
Yeah.
Versus, like, I feel like everyone our age knows Zooey Deschanel.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Anyways,
a little tangent there.
Only people, only cool hipsters knew Zooey Deschanel. As you watched 500 Days of Summer.
Mm-hmm.
What a time. I watched that for the first time.
That blew my mind that she was that same person, because she's like blonde, it doesn't have bangs. I'm like, who is that?
Back when she was just a singer.
Yeah.
Singing for the band She and
she
Him.
plays such a different character also. Like, that character, like, hates Christmas. And that's the opposite of every Zooey Deschanel character otherwise. Yeah.
Do you think was that when she was married to Ben Gibbard? Oh, okay. All right. So many things.
And back to Property Brother.
Yeah, now a Property Brother. Oh, poop. I have so many thoughts. Okay. We can't talk about it now.
The podcast.
The Zooey Deschanel fandom. Oh, man.
Back to Twilight.
Yeah. We'll talk about. I was going to say this story where I gave myself bangs after Amy showed me New Girl, and Amy was like, probably don't do that. It's like 2 a.m. And I did it anyways. Yep. Anyways. And that's our friendship right there. Amy's like, I don't know, maybe think a little more, Callie. And I'm like,
I'm always supportive after the fact.
Absolutely.
I'm just rational.
You're even supportive in the moment. You just pointed out really good things. Like, don't give yourself bangs in the middle of summer. It'll be hot. They were. Anyways. Twilight. Okay. Okay, speaking of, let's really go back to what we're actually talking about, the other vampires. So I thought it was interesting also the other vampires are, they think there's something weird about Edward, but they can't put like their nose on what it is, which again is no one looking at eye color. No one in this whole series seems to get it except for Bella Swan. Like, okay, because in my mind, and maybe I don't know. I'm not a hater. I'm not a good book critic. I'm a good book fan, you know? Like, there's an important difference here because I'm willing to accept any justification or rationale to make the story work. But this feels to me like kind of an oversight. Like, wouldn't they look at his eyes and obviously notice they're not red? Like, I don't know. I don't get it. I don't get that.
Wait. So what are you talking about? Like, that they don't know that he's a vegetarian or whatever? Or is that what you're saying? Or
Yeah.
Well, no, she does know.
They know that? I thought that's what they're alluding to when they're like talking about how Edward seems off and weird. Is that he like isn't hunting like they do. What do you think it is?
No, I guess that is what they're talking about, but then she realizes because it says like poor boy, I suppose Carlisle has imposed his odd habits on the lad.
Oh, yeah.
So they are questioning that. But okay. Yeah, but she still doesn't notice his eye color.
Yeah. I don't know. I just feel like that's one of the biggest tells in the book. I don't know.
Yeah, I wonder if like the other vampires just don't notice that because they don't like control their thirst. I don't know.
Yeah. And it was a criticism at school. Like, isn't anyone noticing Edward's eyes are going from golden to black?
Yeah. I do think like that's
someone
for sure.
Picks that up. Yeah. Okay.
I had notes here because it's talking about Siobhan and how she turned Maggie because she had some gift that she thought would make
manifest, a really as like a power
as a vampire. And I was like, I wonder if there was insight about Edward and what gift he has. And later we learn apparently they all have gifts, which I was not aware of. Like, I thought it was just some of them, but some of them are like more like supernatural kind of things, and others are just like a lot of compassion and or being really pretty.
Intense personality traits.
Yeah.
Excuse me, Rosalie's power is not being pretty, it's being pig-headed.
No, it's not. I noticed this in the book, which I didn't notice at first. He says that to Bella because Bella is talking about how she's kind of jealous of Rosalie. And when we get Edward's perspective, he's like, oh, it's really that she's beautiful, but I wasn't about to say that.
Oh, yeah, I must have missed that. Anyways.
No, it was like a very like little thing he said, but I'm like, oh, that's kind of hilarious that he purposely didn't say that to her.
Yeah, that's super funny. Yeah. Okay, I did think that was interesting about her trying to find vampires, or like find people she thought would have powerful vampires become powerful vampires. And that makes sense, as like if you're going to be like the matriarch and like your view is not like a family relationship, but like you want to be like in power of all these vampires and have them in your like clan. Like it makes kind of sense to have like seek out weird powers. Anyways, interesting. But I also then was like, interesting then thinking about Alice not knowing where she, like, I don't know. I wonder if those are tied together in some way, or we're just getting like little teasers for things that are going to come in future novels, or if that's wishful thinking.
Yeah. Just now when we were talking about that, it did have me thinking about, since Siobhan is like going out of her way to turn people to get these powers, which is a pretty evil thing to do. I'm like, it makes sense that we don't see her later in the books, because I have a feeling that Carlisle's like, let's stay away from her. So
for sure. And especially like with both Alice and Edward having such unique powers too, like I would imagine he's like protective. I mean, you see even there, he's kind of protective over Edward. So yeah. My final note on this chapter is then that Edward leaves to go hunt people, maybe the baddies.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've anything else.
I just have one more note that I'm like, I feel like this was specifically put in here for a reason, and this is, I don't know how much I'll say. It might be spoilers for New Moon, but he talks about, he's talking to Alice on the phone about the odds of how things are going to go. She's like calling him to just give him some encouragement, saying that it's 80-20 odds now versus I think it was like 70-30 before. And he says that he couldn't trust the confidence in her voice when he couldn't read her thoughts. And I thought that this was intentionally put in there to establish he cannot read thoughts over the phone, because that comes up in New Moon. I don't know if you remember what happens in New Moon.
Nope.
Did I say anything or no? It's maybe I'm not going to say anything because I don't know how much you remember, so I don't want to spoil it.
Now that you say it, I like vaguely remember that they maybe talk on the phone. And
it's him talking to Jacob on the phone.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if people know, they know, but you'll know eventually. A couple weeks.
Great. Midnight Sun, chapter 16. To start off, Edward is start off, they're matching clothes. Oh man, cutesy. Okay, but I cannot get over, like, I just straight up get annoyed in this section that Edward is still so baffled anytime she has a reaction that's not happy. And in fact, half the time when her reactions are happy, he's baffled. Like,
I have a note saying, for someone who can read minds, he is not good at reading the room.
No. Oh, that's so funny. Yeah, I just was over it at this point. I'm like, we get it, Edward. You are confused by Bella. We've talked about it in every chapter of this book.
Yeah. I have almost no notes on this chapter, and I think it's just because I'm like, this is nothing new. Like,
Yeah.
especially we also already have it from Bella's perspective. We read it the week before, but
Yeah.
I really don't have much notes at all. So any insights you have, please share.
Yeah. Um oh yeah. Okay. The next note, so they get in Bella's truck, drive out to go to the woods to the meadow scene. And again, he's so baffled, like not understanding why she's uncomfortable, assumes it's fear. Again and again and again, he assumes it's fear. And that is literally baffling to him that she would be nervous about doing an unexpected 5-mile hike on the Olympic Peninsula.
Yeah.
Like, it just shows, like, again, I'm trying to like empathize that, like, I think Stephanie Myers is trying to show that he's like so disconnected from the human world still, even though like he is living a more human life than like any other vampire. Like, he's still so disconnected is like my best assumption I can make. Again, where I'm like, I'm not a good critic. I'm so willing to believe anything to like make the story work. But I was like, I would 1,000,000% be with Bella in this. Like, I'd be so annoyed.
Yeah. I also feel like he could potentially just be so used to like anybody, like everybody is like afraid of him but doesn't know why kind of thing. So if you did know like that he was a vampire, you'd be especially afraid kind of thing. So but yeah, it is annoying at this point. It's like, obviously you told her that you were a vampire and she's still around. Pretty sure that would have done it. Pretty sure if she was afraid, she would have done something about it then. Like,
you think? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And this note, I come back to in like 1 or 2 chapters when he finally steps out into the sun. But I talk about my notes mostly in this chapter. The idea that like Edward throughout this whole section and before this, but particularly in this chapter, we're building up all this anxiety around him stepping out into the sun. And like, we see it like building and building and building, and him like mentally preparing himself for Bella to be disgusted by him, for all this stuff, right? Like, there's so much buildup where he's so nervous. And my notes are literally like, that feels so weird for then it to be just he glitters. Like, I just don't get it.
I feel like oh, sorry, continue if you have more to say.
Yeah. No. You jump in, because obviously I talk about more than in Midnight Sun that we actually see. It's more dramatic than that. But yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you were reading this and didn't have any context for what Twilight was or whatever, how disappointed would you be that it's just him being glittery?
I remember that when I read it the first time. Like, I remember being like, what is that? Is that it?
You did read it before the movie came out then, if you remember that.
Yeah. I for sure. Yeah, I know I read the first one before I saw the movie.
Okay.
But I just don't know if I read all of them before I started seeing the movies. But yeah, like I remember being like, what? And even we're going to talk about it in the next chapter, but like, I swore I missed something. Like, when I read it this time, I went back and read the last ending of Twilight and like, so confused, frustrated, disappointed, all the things. Anyways, so yeah, so a lot of my notes are being like annoyed, like from this chapter in Midnight Sun, because we see so much build up for what feels like nothing. And this is where I think the movie actually does more injustice, or like makes it like a more fake jokey thing, because it is so like sparkly glitter. Like, it's not so crazy. It's not like even like jarring, you're being blinded by the glitter, you know, or like anything like that. Like it really is like, feels like kind of nothing, you know? Did you feel that way like watching the movie? How did you feel on this, like this section? I guess this is not this section. This is the next section.
Yeah, we're kind of jumping in the next chapter. I don't have anything of note of this.
All right, hold on. I'll pause. I'll
Okay.
get myself. Okay, here's my only other note before we like jump in. Besides that, is that Edward is reminded of Persephone while he's seeing Bella in this field, which I thought was a pretty like cool and kind of interesting comparison. And in later chapters, he compares himself with Hades and talks about the pomegranate. Yeah, and so I think that's like a really interesting idea of, and for people who aren't familiar, a hyper simplified version of the like Hades Persephone deal. So I really like Persephone in part because she is both the queen of the underworld and like this goddess of death, and also the goddess of flowers and springtime, which I love a paradox. And basically a simpler version is she gets kind of tricked, kind of falls in love with Hades, but is mostly tricked by Hades into a contract where she has to go live in the underworld with him. But then she like genuinely loves him. They fall in love. It obviously, like, depending on what story, there's different like versions of this, and this is very simplified, but she starts getting really depressed, and her job is she is the one who makes life. So nothing is growing on the Earth's surface now that Persephone is trapped in the underworld with Hades. And so eventually they negotiate a contract where Persephone spends 6 months above ground and 6 months in the underworld with him, but she stays married to him her whole life, and depending on the story, she does love him and sometimes she does resent him. But that was the idea of why we have seasons, is because when Persephone is above ground, it's like spring when she gets let out, and then summer, everything's growing, and then fall is when she has to go back to be with Hades and things start to die, and then it's winter.
I appreciate that insight. I did look up Persephone when I did this, because I am so bad at Greek mythology. I find it so interesting, but I'm just so bad at keeping it all straight.
Yeah.
And that's honestly more than I even just read about. So I appreciate that.
I read a few different stories about Persephone's and Hades recently, actually, because I saw a Pinterest post talking about it's okay if you're a paradox because look at Persephone. And I was like, what? Say less. I need to know everything. Also, because one of my coworkers has a very large Persephone's forearm tattoo. So I was intrigued. Yeah. Anyways, but yeah, so kind of an interesting comparison for him to make, obviously based on what we know about Edward, I think it's pretty easy that we can believe he views himself as Hades, as this like negative captor that Persephone loves, but maybe will also resent. So I think if you know the story, it gives some good context for kind of Edward's mental space around Bella. So yeah, I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I simply Googled it, saw that Persephone was married Hades, king of the underworld. I'm like, okay, that's all I need to know.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, yeah. Yeah. And then my final note for the chapter is eek, cliffhanger, which also I realized it was not that much of a cliffhanger. What happened is I hit next page on my Kindle, and then read the first sentence. And so then I saw and then Bella screamed. I thought that's where it ended, the last chapter. And so then I was like, oh my gosh, but it does not end with her screaming. It ends with him stepping into the sunlight, just like, Twilight does. Yeah. So on that note, Twilight 13. Amy, tell me your impressions of this opening scene before I go on a rant.
I honestly don't have a lot for like the opening scene. I don't know, it depends what you call the opening scene. I don't have a lot of notes.
This initial intro, it's just ended. Edward is about to step in the sunlight. Jump. That's where Twilight 12 ends. Twilight 13, right? That's what chapter we're on. Yeah. Twilight 13. He's laying in the grass and she's talking about him glittering.
Oh, I was reading my notes wrong. Okay.
If you don't know, go into my rant, which is fine.
Well, I'll just say my first note of the chapter is there's a line saying, it's talking about him smiling, and he's saying, "I don't scare you," and she's like, "No more than usual," and he smiled wider. His teeth flashed in the sun, and I'm like, that's a little different than "This is the skin of a killer, Bella." Which I just am like, yeah, a little bit different.
So funny. Man.
So I think in my head I just kept comparing it to the movie because I think this is probably the biggest difference between the movie and the books we've seen so far. There's definitely been some stuff that's been left out of the movies, but like this they kind of covered.
A plot difference. Yeah. In not a huge way, but in a way. Yeah,
and I think it's just in a way where the way that it was done in the movies is such an injustice because I'm like, you could have included this stuff. And I think I have a note later on about something specifically that's said about Edward, and I'm like, I love Robert Pattinson, but he did such an injustice to this, and it's very possible it was not Robert Pattinson's fault and it was the way that it was adapted. But yeah, it's like, this could have been so much better. So
yeah, I do feel like, I don't know, do you know, did Stephanie Myers help write the script for Twilight, or do you know how involved she was with the movies?
I think she did. I would imagine she did, but I don't actually know. The only thing I know is that apparently she makes a cameo appearance in the Twilight movie, which I was watching for. It already happened, I guess, but I did not see it when it happened. It's like, I think it was like the first section that we watched, and it's when Bella and Charlie go to that little cafe thing, and apparently she's at the counter on a laptop, and she was actually writing the last book when that was happening.
That's cool.
I saw that in some like extra things, but then when watching the movie, I didn't actually see her, so I don't know if I missed it or if it got like cut for the movie, like the DVD or something.
Okay, I'm Googling right now if she was involved in the script writing.
Yeah, I am curious because like it seems kind of crazy that if she was, that this wouldn't be included, since this is kind of where the whole like conception of the whole series came, because this was what she had a dream about. So it seems kind of crazy that she wouldn't try to get it more included. But
yeah, she did not write the screenplay. Melissa Rosenberg wrote the screenplay based on the novel. And it was directed by Catherine Hardwicke, is maybe how you say her last name. Which makes sense to me because I'm sorry, Melissa, but I feel like, and not even as much Twilight 1, because we stand by Breaking Dawn Part 2 is the best. I actually genuinely loved the Breaking Dawn movies. And then I feel like I was not into Twilight or Eclipse for the movies, but I can't remember. It's obviously been so long.
Okay, I did just find, let me find.
Oh, did you find something
contrary? It's a Reddit page, so who knows exactly how accurate it is, but it says that she was an executive producer on both the Breaking Dawn films, so she had more input, which is very interesting after you just said that.
I just said that.
I also found it interesting because I didn't remember until I was like looking into it, and I was like looking to see how long the books were, to see how long this would take us to get through these and what the schedule would be like. And Breaking Dawn is so much shorter than all the other books, but it has 2 whole movies. And I'm like, I feel like that speaks a lot to her involvement because she wanted to include more things. And I get why they can't necessarily have the authors as involved in the movies because I'm sure the authors would have justification to keep everything in the movies, you know, because there's justification for it. But I think that this is by far the thing I'm the most mad that they cut out of the movies. So
yeah, and I just feel like the movies in general, the movies feel like in some ways the movies are good, and in some ways the movies feel almost like they ride the line of being a spoof of Twilight the books versus like a movie adaptation. Like it rides that line really close.
Yeah.
And again, maybe that's because so many of my memories now are tied to all the memes because it's been so long. Like that's valid, but yeah, definitely very different vibes. With that being said, let me continue my rant.
I was going to say, let's get further.
Already started. There is so much freaking buildup for like how many pages are we into these books? I just tried to look on my phone, which is not my Kindle, but so I don't know, but we're like somewhere between 400, 600 pages into this at this point, right? We're like 400.
I think like 300 or 400, because I think it's like 600 total, and we're currently 53% of the way through it.
Okay. Regardless, we're talking like at least 700 pages we have been reading about this.
Oh, you're talking about both books. Okay, yeah. Okay.
Well, I was talking about one book individually. I thought we were at like page 600, and because I remember being like, no, I thought we were at like 400 and just under 500.
By the end of this section, we probably are, but right now where we're at.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Because I did not remember them being so long. I was like, good for you, 14-year-old Callie. Yeah. Good job reading long books. The trend does not end. Okay. Anyways, there's the point being, regardless of how many pages, there is so much buildup to this scene. This scene specifically. I even feel like I've been saying it in every episode. I'm like, oh, the metal scene's coming up. The metal scene's coming up. The
fact that the scene has a name it is known by, you know?
Yes. And it's like not just because of the movie. Also, it is iconic in the book. And like there's so much anticipation. There's so much angst. Edward is convinced he's going to be so revolting to her, so awful, all this stuff. And they cut her reaction. We do not, in the Twilight books, get her original reaction to him walking out. And that's where I like went backwards and reread the end of the chapter because I was like, what? How?
I honestly didn't even really catch it, which is ridiculous.
I love that. Normally, I'm the one who doesn't catch stuff and you're like on it. I'm like, what? We get like minutes later, but like in Midnight Sun, we get her actual initial reaction to him. And we really don't from the Twilight perspective. We kind of do, but not overtly. You don't get like in Midnight Sun, she yells and is trying to like come at him and like all this stuff. And in Twilight, because here's the other thing I'm mad about in this section is that it also, I was like, okay, is it just the movie's fault that like the glittering vampire thing is so like people talk about it like it's so dumb? Because I kind of feel like the glittering vampire thing discredits the entire franchise in a lot of ways. I mean, like, I think people just, as seriously as people take vampire romances, I do feel like it kind of discredits it for a lot of people who maybe would even be okay with a vampire romance, cannot get past the glittering thing. So I was hopeful on this reread that knowing all that context, I was going to pick up on something. No, it literally says the word glittering in the book. It does not talk about like anything else. It does not make it sound like it's dangerous. It's so crazy. It sounds like he put on too much highlighter. Like, I just like, I can't like, You picked a glittery highlighter. Speaking of, did you guys just see that ColourPop is doing a Twilight collab? Like, just recently. That's so funny to me. You can get a whole set of like moody purple and blue and green glittery eyeshadows. I kind of feel like
when we started this podcast, you're like, I think Twilight's back, and it's like, okay, there's that. And Midnight Sun now has this adaptation coming out. It's fully back.
It's back. Yeah, so I do feel like I went actually to Ulta to try to buy the Twilight eyeshadow palette, but it's online only, or at least it wasn't at my Ulta. So tragic. Anyways, but I was like legit annoyed. It just feels like, I don't know. It was like so much buildup for not a lot of payoff. And that is just one of my biggest frustrations, is to have huge buildup with no payoff sucks as a reader. It's just like not a fun reading experience. And I felt like that's what this was. And actually, I make a note of this later. Two of my biggest pet peeves where I really get like actually annoyed with characters is this is one, when there's so much buildup and no payoff. And I had to go through all that tension because I'm a reader who experiences things viscerally. Like, I am in the book. I am also having a panic attack with you, character. Like, so you made me go through all that for nothing?
Yeah.
Ugh, hate that. My second, actually maybe even worse, is a miscommunication trope.
So you love Twilight, right?
Yes. And we are kind of a little like that, but we have a couple moments that are really like that. And I hate it every time. It's a good thing I'm married to a therapist, because I want to be like, just talk about your feelings. Move on. Drives me crazy. Anyway,
I love how passionate you are about this when it's something that like I just didn't have much of a reaction to, and I think it's just because I kind of knew what was coming, and like, but I think you're totally valid in what you're saying. I just didn't have much of a reaction.
No, I think I had such a big reaction because I was like, I cannot be remembering this correctly. This has to be the movie got it wrong. This has to be, I missed some context when I was a little baby 14-year-old, and that's why I remember. No, 14-year-old Callie, you were right. That's bullshit. Oh, so mad about it. I'm also on my third cup of coffee, which isn't helping. I'm like, really?
That's where all the energy's coming from.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
anyways, all right. So there, rant. Okay, end of the rant. I will just say reading Midnight Sun was a little bit of a soothing balm, because it's done better. It's done much better in Midnight Sun. We'll talk more about it on the Midnight Sun chapter, but rant over. Amy, talk about any notes you have from this chapter now that I've just talked for 20 minutes straight.
No, I mean, valid, completely valid. I'm just looking at my notes. I feel like I don't have like a lot, or it ties into my notes with Midnight Sun. I'm really excited for when we get done with this and are just reading one book at a time, and my notes will be so much more coherent and easy to read through. But
yeah, I do feel that.
I guess I'll bring this up, but it does tie into what we read in Midnight Sun, and there's talking about where Bella it says that she could smell his cool breath in his face, and like she like closed her eyes and was like inhaling. And then when we see, I made a note here, so we read this chapter first, and I made a note saying, I have a feeling if this moment was played out a little differently, Bella would be dead. And then when we read Edward's perspective, it talks about how when Bella's eyes were closed, that he was ready to like bite her right there. I'm like, okay, yeah, it was a real close call there. I'm also during this whole scene, I'm like, what visions is Alice having? I bet she's freaking out.
True, that's true. Yeah, this whole scene. Okay, things start getting real romantic. And here's just some interesting, I feel like context, because I was like not writing tons of notes, because here's the thing. I love fantasy romance. You guys already know, we've referenced other books we've read. Me and Amy both are into the genre. Love it. I don't have any problem with like reading some spicy books, but I don't like want to talk about it I don't want to make notes about it. It's weird. And
no, I think I kind of agree.
And I was thinking about how me and Amy, so we've been best friends like our entire lives. We've never been like the girlfriends who are like, let me dish about a hot guy. Like, I think we've talked about crushes a couple times in our whole life, besides being like, hey, I'm with someone.
Yeah.
But like, even that, we're not like,
talk about it.
No.
Yeah.
No, we're Minnesotan. Some of us are repressed Christian upbringings. Me.
Well, it's also interesting because we both got into like ACOTAR at the same time, and I feel like a lot about stuff that's talked about ACOTAR is like the spiciness. And we talked about like everything but the spiciness.
I'm like, yeah, I can read one of those scenes. It does not bother me. I even enjoy reading it. Like, I like the romantic tension, but I'm like, I don't want to make notes about it. It feels just like weird. I don't know.
You can comment.
What?
I'm kind of with you on that. I didn't have a lot of notes at all in this chapter in regards to those moments. I had a lot of notes about other things. One of the notes that I had was, I vividly remember the line that's in both the book and the movie about being the like brand of heroin. And I'm like, the movie did such a bad job of conveying the tone around that. In the movie, it's this ridiculous line and is so stupid. And then in the book, it's like Bella is the one who says it, first of all. Like, she's the one who brings up heroin specifically. And it's this little light moment that they laugh at. The movie, it's like, this is my least favorite line of the movie, but also one of my favorites because of how ridiculous it is. But
Well, and then I was thinking about how, I wonder if that scene is what got Robert Pattinson. Do you remember his, like, I feel like his next really big movie after Twilight, like after the franchise, was that like 9/11 movie? Do you know what I'm talking about? Like, it's like a romantic, like a drama that he's in. I watched it with Olivia Giannini back in the day, and it was a classic example of her wanting to make me watch something so we could suffer together, not because she thought they were good, which she did multiple times to me. Anyways, not the point. But like, no, it's this movie about him being, I think he's like a drug addict in the whole movie, I'm pretty sure. And he's like strung out, but this girl's like in love with him. And then he finally, at the end of the movie, spoilers for whatever the movie is called, I guess. Sorry. He finally gets shit together.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, and is gonna like go like talk to his dad and like get a job because he's so in love with her. And then his dad's office is in the Twin Towers, and it's 9/11, and he dies.
Oh my god.
That's how it ends.
9/11 movie. I'm like, there's a movie about 9/11.
Robert Pattinson. There's a 9/11 romance movie with Robert Pattinson.
Thanks. Why?
He's a drug addict for the whole time. So anyways.
Oh man. No,
it was so depressing. Yeah.
But anyways, I find out heroin got him that role.
Yeah, I do. I do think that. That's what I'm saying.
Too funny. Yeah, that's why they gave him the line instead of Bella. They're like, oh, we know that Robert Pattinson wants
the end of this
franchise. Let's have him talk about heroin.
Yeah. That's what I'm thinking. They thought, wow, you did a good job with that, Senor Pats.
Oh, that's funny.
Oh, man. Wow, I'm on Tangent City today.
I know. We're on the most tangents I think we've ever had in an episode.
Yeah. Woo, man. Okay. The other note I have. I have actually a fair amount of notes for these chapters. But so in this scene, things are getting romantic, and then literally, like, you know, Amy, you just talked about, like, she gets close, she almost dies. This happens kind of twice, that Edward nearly kills her in the meadow, in the middle of a, like, very, like, romantic build-up scene, right? But then things get kind of aggressive and intense. My notes specifically say, in not a cute way. The red flags are too many, even for me in this scene. Even for me. And he gets real intensive and aggressive, and I'm not into it. For the first time in the whole freaking book, I'm not into it.
I'm curious, is it specifically when you're reading Midnight Sun, or is it also reading Twilight? Like,
this is in Twilight. Reading
okay.
the chapter in Twilight, I felt that way.
Okay.
And I think, again, it's because you can tell Bella's kind of freaked out. And I'm specifically thinking about him, like, running around when he kind of, like, loses, like, in Midnight Sun, he says he loses control, but in a different way, right? And it's his, like, anger, which I even, again, like, even I can say, like, it's, like, good writing in the sense of, like, yeah, Stephanie Meyers clearly conveys that he's, like, losing it. Like, in Twilight, you realize he's, like, pissed. He's pissed about this situation and he's losing it. But Edward just generally is so not a morally gray character. Like, his morals are so strong that, you know, he has, like, when we think about, like, morally gray, main all-powerful male characters in fantasy romance, you know, like, Edward is not the typical one, because his morals are, like, so strict that even though, you know, he has these, like, instincts, he hates that about himself. He's not even like where you see with, like, Rhys being a little more like, I'll do what's necessary to, like, protect people. Like, he's absolutely like, no, this is overtly evil and wrong about me. Mm-hmm. Anyways, but in this scene, he, like, loses it a little bit. And it's the first time I feel like we see him, maybe not true, but I was going to say the first time we see him as a truly morally gray character. But to me, I think it's because he's, like, he's kind of lost in this, which, again, maybe people are listening and are like, you idiot, he's been stalking her, watching her sleep for months. This is the first time he's morally gray.
That's what I was thinking. I'm like, I think he was morally gray before this, but
well, for me, this is the first time, because he doesn't care about her feelings. Gosh, sometimes I gotta laugh at myself, where I'm like, if it's done for love, it's kind of hot. If it's not done for love, it's kind of creepy. Anyway, so that's how I felt. Yeah, and Bella's kind of scared of him for maybe the first time since that initial, like, couple biology classes, where she was a little scared of him, but more so like, you just hate me and I don't get it, you know?
Yeah. I did have a note specifically about, it might be a little further along in the chapter than this, but it's specifically talking about her being afraid. And it says about how he opened his eyes and they were hungry. And she says specifically, not in a way to make me fear, but rather to tighten the muscles in the pit of my stomach and send my pulse hammering through my veins. And I was like, isn't that fear? Isn't that just describing fear? Does she just not know what being afraid is?
Pretty sure that's fear.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, absolutely.
I think she's just not into her emotions. They all need therapy. Moral of the story.
They do. They do need some therapy. Yeah. What are my other notes? Yeah, I talk about the heroine.
I do have a note. I think I might be a little further along than you are with where
that's all right. But no, jump in.
A note of the most highlighted section or passage of this section, and it's the quotes that we also get in the movie, and it's the lion falling in love with the lamb, and they say, "What a stupid lamb," and "What a sick masochistic lion." And I'm like, I do like that they kept movies, but
how do you feel about this dialogue?
It just seems like dialogue that they would never have. I don't know. It just seems so out of place to me. I'm like,
it feels so cheesy nonsense. I hate it. I
think I hate it because of how out of place. It's the same with the heroine and the skin of the killer. All of those. You know, I kind of love them, but
oh man, I hate it. Oh, it's so bad. But yeah, lots of kind of like religious references, which I think is interesting. Also, the Lion and the Lamb is like a big religious Christian reference specifically, which is interesting. So yeah. Okay. One thing I do like in this chapter, I feel like I've really complained more than maybe I've complained in the whole podcast about this chapter. But a thing that I really appreciate, is when in the conversation, when Bella finally kind of interrupts Edward and is like, will you please stop wording everything like you're trying not to scare me or not to convince me like that you're dangerous, and just actually tell me what you're thinking and what's going on. Mm-hmm. And I, as the number one hater of the miscommunication trope, I'm like, thank you, Bella. About frickin' time. Ugh.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah. So I appreciated that.
Okay, so the note that I had on that was about how Bella's like, don't worry about like offending me or frightening me or whatever. Yeah. I had a note where I was like, I feel like this is finally a turning point for Edward also, because he talks about that he has to accept that somehow that Bella is not all freaked out. And I'm like, finally, he is realizing this and decides that he needs to be honest with her and tell her the truth. And I'm like, this chapter, it's funny because you're like so annoyed by this chapter. I'm like, this is kind of a turning point where I actually kind of like Edward now. That's the frustration like with the build-up and whatnot, but I'm like, I feel like Edward has a bit of a turning point. He also is like going a bit crazy, but when he calms down, I'm like, finally, like, so
yeah, it is. Yeah, it's interesting because I think we do see this a lot in romantasy, this idea that then you have this all-powerful, super intense male love interest who then feels like their whole purpose is like, I have to like take care of you, you fragile, breakable creature. And that just annoys me. Like,
same.
I just can't deal with it. But then on the flip side, I'm like, I do like the like touch her and you die trope, but like don't treat her. I think that, okay, we're at tangent number 8. I think that's why I like Rhysand so much as a main character, because he is like protective, wants what's best for Feyre, but is not, he is like, you can do it. Okay, I'm giving you the autonomy over the choice. And if you think you can do it, you can do it. So freaking refreshing. And that's right. Like the bad thing with Tamlin. Spoilers, too late. You already heard them. Okay.
I feel like anybody who is watching this podcast at this point is well aware there's going to be ACOTAR spoilers. I think we've talked about it multiple times in every single episode. I'm like, is the pipeline Twilight to ACOTAR or ACOTAR to Twilight?
I think it depends how, because, right? No, but here's what's cool about the 2 books, right? Is like Twilight is what got me. It was probably the first fantasy I ever read, even though it's so low fantasy, you know? And it was definitely the first romantasy I ever read. It opened me up to then, like, I wanted this whole, like, all these genres like this, right? Like, and like, I was super into like City of Bones and things like that, which like kind of come out of that. And ACOTAR was the first as an adult that did that same thing. Like I was not reading romantasy at all wasn't even really reading almost any fiction, and read ACOTAR and now have been like obsessed. So I don't know. I think they're both clearly, they are very compelling, and they did a lot in their times to make reading cool and like a big pop culture moment. So I like that.
I agree.
Good job, Stephanie and Sarah.
That's also are Stephanie and Sarah, because those were like two of my best friends in elementary school. Stephanie and Sarah.
I just thought that as I said it. I was like, wow.
Yeah. I also, like, when you said that, I'm like, I never put it together. But anyway. Oh, more tangents.
It's not like they're that crazy of names. Like,
yeah, they're pretty basic white girl names, especially for that time, you know?
Yeah. Anyways, what a time. Yeah, so I just have two more notes on this section of Twilight, even though we've talked about it extensively, I feel like, at this point. But one thing is, I am really annoyed with like the rapid back and forth in this chapter. I feel like we've already kind of talked about it, but it's like romantic scene, death scene, romantic scene, death. Like, I don't know. And just like the way it's done to me feels like a little like forced, which I'm not into, even though I get they're trying to like make you feel. I think that is the experience Edward's having. So again, maybe that's great writing, but I was also annoyed by it, even if that was like the intention, you know?
Yeah. I'm also wondering if like that's kind of the reason why they went the way that they did with the movie, because I feel like, even though I don't like how the movie did it, I feel like it'd be really hard to convey like the emotions going back and forth.
Yeah, without it seeming really like fake and cheesy, especially. I do think it would be really hard. Yeah, unless they did some kind of voiceover thing where we could hear Edward's inner dialogue. They could have done that, but then they would have had to.
Yeah, but then it would be expected for like the rest of the movie and stuff. Yeah. I feel like it's easy to criticize the movie for sure for a lot of reasons, but like I think it's pretty difficult to like adapt a book into a movie, especially when it's something like this that's in first person and so much of the context is stuff going on in their heads, you know?
Yeah, totally. Okay, the only other thing that's I thought was really interesting is in Edward's Fear, he talks about remembering Alice's vision of Bella when she's dead. And that is like a grounding, I mean, it's weird to say, but kind of a grounding image for him in like remembering to stay in control in these like challenging moments, right? But I think it's interesting the things he specifically highlights, again, in maybe a foreshadowing way, is her being still, cold, and there being like no blood flushing to like her cheeks, which all would be true if she becomes a vampire also. So I just thought that was really kind of an interesting note. Yeah. Anyways, that was that.
Yeah.
Okay, Midnight Sun, chapter 17, Edward's POV.
You do have one more little note. Because I wasn't sure if you were talking about Midnight Sun at the point or not, but I have one more note about Twilight. Specifically, I don't think we've actually seen the moment in the movie yet. Yeah, I don't think we have. Where he calls her Spider Monkey. Oh, you remember the meme at least, right? Yeah, okay, you remember that. I thought it was pretty funny that in the book he says, "Come on, little coward, climb on my back." Yeah. I'm like, I don't know which of those I dislike more, Spider Monkey or little coward. Like, that got me, man. I was like, I think maybe changing it to Spider Monkey was a good thing, even though there's so many memes about it. But that just I thought that was funny.
Yeah,
we can jump into Midnight Sun. I just
great. Yeah,
I guess we can talk about Midnight Sun also.
Oh man. Yeah, so Midnight Sun starts off obviously the same timeline as our Twilight chapter, but we get so much more detail. Callie is satisfied. Specifically, the biggest thing being Edward steps out into the sunlight. Bella starts coming towards him. She screams his name, and then he is like, wait, stop. And trying not to have her get closer because he's tense and he's not sure how he's going to react, whatever. And they talk about he can see himself in Bella's eyes and he looks like a man on fire, which is so different, so different than a sparkly, excessive highlighter boy. So
I feel like I sense where you're going with this, but from my perspective, because I feel like you're just hitting on and are like, this is how it should have been in Twilight, right? Is that what you're
1,000,000%? That's how it should have been.
I feel like it's really intentional on how it's described differently because you're getting the two different perspectives, and Bella is seeing it as this beautiful thing, and Edward is seeing it as him being this monster. And I think because you're not getting it from a point of view that isn't someone who's directly involved, you don't necessarily get what the truth is, it's just from those people's perspectives as to how they see it,
I like that.
Yeah.
No, I think that's great. See, again, I'm not a hater.
It should have been fire.
I just think the fire justifies all the angst.
Yeah. I get that. That makes sense.
Yeah. And obviously you'd be startled if someone was covered in glitter walking downtown. But in Twilight,
such a ridiculous sentence.
Yeah. But Edward acts, there's literally a line that says he would cause traffic accidents. Yeah. And I just don't think how it is portrayed that is accurate. But a man who you thought was on fire, absolutely. That would cause traffic accidents.
Oh, that's too funny.
So I just feel like that that explanation justified a lot more for me, the tension. But I like what you said. I think that's that makes a lot of sense and is kind of cool.
I know, that's why I kind of have a love-hate relationship with the two perspectives writing, but it's part of the reason that I like it is because I think people a lot of the times when they're reading from someone's perspective don't fully grasp how that person definitely has biases, you don't really think about that when you're reading from someone's perspective, but when you get
you assume that's the truth.
What's that?
You assume that's the truth, right? Whatever their POV is.
Yeah, exactly. So I like having two POVs for that reason, because I feel like you get more of a full picture or someone else's understanding. But
yeah, and I will say this is the first time the two accounts have been dramatically different, that it hasn't just been around a miscommunication or a misunderstanding. This is the first time we really see things dramatically different that are in both books, which is interesting.
Yeah, and I do feel like for that reason, it's pretty easy to be why wasn't it described this way in Twilight? Because everything else they're kind of seeing the same, except for their feelings. That's the only thing that's really been different between the two. So that makes sense.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I don't have tons of notes for Midnight Sun 17 because we talked about so much in the Twilight POV. I will say his memories where he's talking about Carlisle and Esme, so sweet every time. I know I said it before, but what angels. I just love the two of them. My final thought for this chapter is that we finally get I realize I have to amend this in later notes, but my note for the chapter is he finally comes clean to her about everything, right? It's that trust is he finally decides he's going to trust her. He's not going to like censor himself to not scare her. And he comes clean about like everything. And I thought when I originally wrote the note, I was like, Bella now knows everything we know, which is false because you realize in the next 2 chapters, she doesn't know he's been there every night.
But she come clean though. I was like, if he did not come clean, I would be so mad.
Yeah, he does. He does. He owns it. And I love that he's given himself like a little pep talk, like, be honest. You gotta be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I appreciate that like he kind of puts it into practice nearly immediately. Like he's like, okay, I have to decide that she can like, she's accepted this and like start being real about my experience, you know? Yeah. So I'm really hopeful this is at least a dramatic diminishment in the miscommunication trope that has been the first 60% of this book. So yeah, but that's everything. So what else do you want to add from the Midnight Sun section?
I was looking through my notes and like I highlighted a lot of things just because I think it was after reading. I was like, oh, so this was his perspective kind of thing, but not a lot of stuff of significance. But one of the things that I thought was significant that I liked was in the beginning of the chapter that's from his perspective. He talks about, what does he say? About how he could imagine what Alice's encouragement would be in that moment. And that was saying that like he did stop in the vision, like he didn't lose control and that sort of thing. And I just thought it was really sweet that he was just able to control himself because he was thinking of how Alice would encourage him, which I thought was really nice. So,
that is so sweet. We also, in that section, you really get, like, it's so clear how Edward judges himself so much harsher than anyone else would judge him also, because, like, he says, like, you stopped, you didn't hurt her, and, like, how, like, that's Alice telling him that encourages him to stop, but also he, like, makes a comment, like, and to Alice, that would be enough. Like, that means that I did a good job, where to me, I know it's like not, and I've still like fallen so short or whatever, however he words it, you know? Yeah, which is really like, yeah, just that he's like, that's unacceptable that I was even tempted. Yeah. Very interesting. And again, like, I don't know if it's just today or, in this section, but again, kind of shows the like Stephanie Meyer's like the subtle like religious theme she kind of puts in there, which this is another one about like being tempted is equal to like doing a deed itself, kind of like that idea, which is really interesting. And I think we talked about it in previous chapters, but if you didn't know, Stephanie Meyer's, I assume, is a Mormon because she went to BYU.
I actually have some information. I have like a couple of notes that I have written down to talk about if they ever come up just randomly. Because I randomly did some like research on Stephanie Meyer because you were talking about her going to BYU, which I wasn't aware of at that time. So I like looked into that more. And she is a Mormon. There wasn't any like updated information of it, so I assume she is still a Mormon. But in all of her books, with the exception of one, which I don't know what the deal is with the exception of one, there is no drinking or drugs because of her views on that. And the one exception, there's drinking. But yeah, I thought that was interesting. And because there was, I think it was some Q&A like on her, I don't know if it was her website or it's just a general Q&A about her, and it was talking about like how she puts her morals into her stuff, and she's like, well, it's just kind of how I view things, so it's not that difficult for me to like do that. So anyway, just something of interest, but yeah. So
yeah, very interesting. I feel like I notice a lot of those like kind of religious polls or like wording, almost like the lion and the lamb thing to me is worded in like a way that sounds biblical, you know. Like, again, maybe because that's just a phrase I so have associated with that, maybe not. Anyways, it's very interesting, obviously. The book starts with a Bible verse. We talked about that in Genesis, so yeah, intriguing.
I only have 2 more notes on the chapter, and they're totally not related to one another. And one of them was just the fact that Carlisle required people to attend the funerals of the people that they killed, which I was like, that's like crazy. I also get it, but I'm like, they just like killed a person. Aren't you worried about them killing more people? I just was like, wow. I don't know. That just struck me. I didn't have much to say about it, but I felt like I needed to bring it up. But
it feels like a weird Law and Order plot line. Like, I don't know what it is about
murderer attending someone's funeral that they killed.
Yes, where the murderer always is at the funeral, and then that's how they help catch them.
That's a plot line of that show that's on Netflix that has Christina Applegate. Dead to Me, I think it's called.
Oh, yeah.
Did you watch that?
I think I watched like a couple episodes is all.
Yeah. I think it's not until like the second or even maybe the third scene. I watched all of it. Or season, not scene. Which, spoilers for it, is that they kill someone and then they're like planning a vigil for the person because one of the people is related to the person or whatever. And then this investigator is there and is like, oh yeah, you'd be surprised. Most of the time, like the person who like killed someone comes to these things and they're standing there like, oh no, what do we do?
Anyway. Maybe they're vampires.
Yeah. And then my last note is just at the end of the chapter, which I thought was a sweet moment, was where Edward was saying for the first time in 100 years he was grateful to be a vampire because it all led to him finding Bella. And I'm like, okay, I'm a sucker for that kind of crap. That's pretty sweet.
Yeah, so sweet. Yeah.
I like that my last note of this chapter was that, and my last note of the other chapter was about you little coward. Just a little different.
Yeah. Different vibes. All right. Chapter 14 in Twilight.
Woohoo. I say that whenever we segue into a new chapter and you say that, I always go, woohoo. Not on purpose, but
yeah. So
we get some backstory in this chapter is kind of where we start out, isn't it?
Yeah. Edward's backstory. The family backstories are in the Midnight Sun. Maybe it's
I think it's in both.
Yeah, it's in both. We just get more detail about it in Midnight Sun.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh no. The first thing I highlighted, I was like, I can't remember if this is in Twilight or not, but it is about how Esme died falling from a cliff, and then they brought her to the hospital morgue even though she was still alive. I'm like, how horrific. My God.
Yeah. That 1900s medical team are not doing good.
Crazy.
I know. Yeah, I'm like, that's traumatic. Also that she knew Carlisle her whole life. We knew that from before. Anyways. Crazy.
And then we also get about Emmett dying. We get more in Midnight Sun about it, but we learn here that he was hunting Rosalie was hunting and she found Emmett and a bear was gonna kill him. And I'm like, is that why he likes fighting bears?
Yes! That's what I got too!
I have a feeling it is, whether he knows it or not. Once again, man needs some therapy.
Yeah. He's out killing grizzly bears because they tried to kill him. It's vengeance.
So.
Yeah, a theme between Emmett and Rosalie. Both killing for vengeance.
Yeah. And then the next note I have is about Alice's backstory, which I just was shocked that this was in Twilight and not Midnight Sun. I'm like, I do not remember this at all. That Alice did not remember anything about her human life, doesn't have any idea who created her. She just woke up and was a vampire, and her first memories we learn in, well, this is in Midnight Sun that we learn it. Her first memory is a vision of Jasper. Like, crazy.
Yeah. So crazy. Okay, but this is where I think, or at least I hope, that this is like teasing for like a future book, because they kind of talk about, again, we can talk about it more in the Midnight Sun chapter, but like they talk about like a man who says Alice and she knows it's her name, but then there's no one like there, which makes me think, what if someone like turned her in related to like a vampire clan that wanted to use, like, that turned people for unique powers, you know? And then somehow he like, this person like brought her away because they were being taken advantage of and didn't want, like, they knew how powerful Alice was going to be. And so then they like sent her away to like escape that life.
Or maybe she had a whole nother life as a vampire that she doesn't even remember because someone else's power was like erasing her memory somehow or something crazy.
Maybe, but that one feels more like a stretch.
I mean, you never know.
In this hyper-realistic world, yeah, I'm like, I don't know. Oh, man. Yeah. Anyways, there's my personal fan theory.
Yeah.
Yeah. My first note of the chapter is Edward coming in to the house. It's like a moment in the relationship. Although Charlie's not there, so it's only kind of a moment. It's not like meeting the dad, but yeah, most of my notes about the family are in the Midnight Sun version, where we get a little.
Yeah, I didn't have anything else for that.
Okay. So. Yeah. Yeah, I do think it's funny that he forgets she needs to eat. Yeah, that's kind of cute flavor there. And he finally admits he's been spying on her at night, which she takes pretty frickin' well, although she's
a little too well. I made a note here. I was like, okay, glad he's not keeping a secret. I don't think he's that creepy anymore, but Bella's definitely missing some red flags.
Again, I'm with Bella. Whatever. In the name of love. I do think in the Midnight Sun version, you get him like prepping all the justifications in his mind to like try to soothe her, and then she like just accepts it, and he's like, yeah, okay. Like he just realizes that she's just embarrassed. She's been talking in her sleep, which I think is like really funny because yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he doesn't go into everything right away. He does not yet admit that he has been there every night, but he admits that he's been coming to see her. So yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, I also think the dynamics with Charlie are funny in this. Like, one, that Bella is such a terrible actor. Like, she cannot play it cool for the life of her. Yeah. And then that, like, okay, he thinks she's sneaking out. And this is what I was getting a little mixed up. Is this the night of the dance? It is, right? Because she wasn't going to go. Yeah, it's Saturday, and she was supposed to go to Seattle, and then instead they go to the Meadow. So isn't it the school dance this night?
Yeah, you're totally right. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. So I also think, like, do you think, like, Charlie thought she was lying before, and now she's going to go, like, meet people after the dance, and maybe it's, like, a prom thing, like, he's worried she's going to go out drinking, or, like, things like that, you know?
Well, I had notes about this because I was like, I feel like Charlie's like mistrust in her is such a weird random thing, because like she's never done anything that like we've seen to like make him mistrust her. But then you do get in Midnight Sun some mind reading of his. I don't know if we want to talk about that now, or well,
Yeah.
we can talk about it now, I guess.
Yeah.
About him thinking of himself as a teenager and like the trouble he got into, kind of
Yeah.
thing. So I think
Yeah.
he's just projecting, really.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, he's not the most emotionally in tune dad. I think that's a safe bet we can all agree on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's fair. But yeah, I did realize that it was the night of the dance, which I also thought justified that like a little more.
That does a bit better, but still.
Yeah.
Like, why wouldn't she have just said she was going to the dance, you know? Like,
right. And that's where I think it's weird that then he's talking about like Mike Newton again, because he like to be like, because you like she's not going to dance with him, or like it just seems weird. I guess Charlie, we can just assume, I guess, that Charlie doesn't know anything about what's happening with these teenagers. Is probably a fair bet. So, yeah, you know, it's probably just that. But it does seem like, yeah, I don't know. It was just funny. But because I was like, isn't this the night at the dance? Mike Newton's not free. But I guess Charlie doesn't know that. So I also thought it was funny that then Bella, like, takes a shower and dresses into, like, not cute pajamas because she's trying to convince Charlie she's not sneaking out, and like that Edward doesn't get that, even though he can kind of read Charlie's mind a little bit, until she's like sitting down again, and then he's like, oh, I get it, you know, like that she's to tell him is funny. So yeah,
that was funny. Yeah, I don't have really any more notes for the Twilight chapter, so anything you have?
No, that's it for me. All right. Edward's POV for this section, aka A Midnight Sun, chapter 18, last chapter for today. Okay, well, my notes are pretty much around Edward sharing stories of the family. Again, like this is like a very like romance heavy chapter, and kind of like what me and Amy said before, like I'm just like, I don't need to take notes about like any of that and him like stroking her and whatever. Like I'm like, no, I just want to take notes about like the character development and the plot and stuff like that. So if you're like, and I'm here for the romance, I enjoy it. So just know in those chapters, like I enjoy it, all the delight, all the like, you know, but it's just not, I don't feel like I have any like deep thoughts on it. So I don't have notes to share. But I do have some notes about the family, most of which, I mean, we kind of already started talking about in the Twilight section, but the overall thing of just the amount of love, like I feel like we talk about it every time we hear like these stories about the Cullens, but I just love their family unit. It just makes me like so happy every time we hear these stories. Even like I really liked in this section getting to hear about like Rosalie's story, and like we learned that Carlisle turned Rosalie with the hopes that she would be Edward's mate, and that it was a hot mess and Edward hated her, and kind of Esme also maybe hated her a little bit.
And also like shocked Carlisle was able to keep that a secret since Edward could read his mind. Like I'm like, he was actively not thinking about that. Like,
yeah. Again, it maybe goes to the control piece where like I feel like everyone can use their power to manipulate what Edward can hear. You know, like Alice will like flood him with visions of other things if she doesn't want him to know, and like Carlisle's power being like his self-control, being like his ability to like keep those thoughts away. But yeah, so even though I'm like, that's like funny and classic. Like, parents trying to meddle in your relationships never work. There's the other theme. But I really like appreciated and loved like that by the end of like one, that Edward helps communicate, because Rosalie's in such a panic she can't communicate to Carlisle that she wants him to turn Emmett into a vampire, and Edward like steps in to communicate. That is like a good moment between them. And then he talks about like they left the house. He doesn't use these words, but essentially they leave the house as enemies and they come back as siblings. And it's the first time as he's sitting with Rosalie through this and all the emotion, and like sees how much self-control she had and all this stuff. It's like the first time he kind of like respects her and has this like sibling love for her, which also is interesting because we hear earlier in the book where Edward talks about the only like good thing about Rosalie is that she brought him Emmett. And like that's the main reason he likes her, because he like loves Emmett so much. So I thought that was kind of kind of like sweet that also Emmett is the start of him being able to tolerate Rosalie, and also that he like gains respect for her, and that now being with Bella he's gaining even like more respect for that situation. So I thought that was cool. Honestly, a lot of the chapter was like him talking about Rosalie specifically. It's a lot about the family, but Rosalie's story I feel like is the biggest.
Yeah, it definitely goes into a lot of detail, and I really liked this section because I love learning all the lore. I want all of it. Give me more. Like,
same.
I hope that's what the future books are about, because I enjoyed it a lot. So I really liked these chapters. I honestly did not have a ton of notes on Rosalie. I think you kind of covered anything that I did have notes on. But my next note was about Alice and Edward meeting for the first time, which just is crazy to think about.
Yes.
Because, like, she purposely timed it so that it was Edward and Emmett weren't there, right?
Yeah.
And
she said the family protectors, which I also thought was interesting.
Yeah, so she purposely showed up at a time that they wouldn't be there, and then like the second she meets Edward, she like shows him all these visions that she's had about the relationship, and like thinks about all of like her history. So he basically immediately knows everything about her and what their friendship is going to be like and stuff. And I'm like, that's crazy. Like, I love it, but it's crazy.
Yeah, a lot about this section is really intense. And I think, well said by what Edward says in the book, which is that like it would take a whole week just to cover all the plot points of Alice being like a crazy enigma and what a wild story like life with her is like, would take a whole week to cover the bullet points. I think is like, telling. And again, I'm like, that's screw the werewolf book. I want an Alice book now.
Yeah.
But not an Alice POV. I want like a book just about Alice.
Yeah.
Anyways.
I feel like an Alice POV would just be too confusing for me with all the visions.
Yeah.
It'd be too much.
Yeah. Or it maybe could be a POV, but I don't want a POV of Twilight. From Alice's perspective, if that makes sense.
What I read about Stephanie Meyers and her perspective of writing Midnight Sun, we will not be getting another POV of a book that's already sounds like, which is great. So. Right.
Yeah. Anyways, so just like so intense. And I also thought it was really interesting. He talks about that Alice, even though Edward and Emmett were back, do they say 3 days later? Like a couple days or a couple hours? I think it's a couple days, right?
I don't know.
Okay, I think it's a couple days. But that she's like so firmly entrenched herself in the family already, like that they all view her as the family. Like in 3 days, which is crazy. And then, like, I imagine her greeting Edward as this idea that she has, like, you know, looked through every possibility of how this could go and picked the most, like, what's the most strategic one that's going to work the best. And the best option was to run up and hug him first.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then show him all these memories. And it's like all the memories of her life. And so like he has all the context, which also I did kind of like, because it's this idea that like every relationship Alice comes into has this like crazy imbalance, right? Where she knows like all this stuff and has to like hold herself back. Like she already knows her and Bella are going to be best friends, but she has to like hold it back to not freak people out. And like, and I think it's cool that her two closest relationships in the family are Emmett and Edward, which makes a lot of sense because they're the only people who can kind of experience this with her. And so like
exactly that what I was about to say in response to what you're saying. I'm like, yeah, it makes so much sense that her and Edward are as close as they are, and her and Jasper are.
Yes. Yeah. And so that then like, yeah, Jasper can like feel all of it from her, even if he doesn't get it. And that like Edward then can see it, like, because I'm sure she feels so isolated in other relationships.
Yeah.
And that I like that then she like adds in, it almost is like an afterthought. Like she's so excited to meet Edward. She clearly knows like they're going to be the closest of the siblings, which they like are. We like see that, you know. Alice is like the most supportive of him. And then like, then almost like an afterthought, she's like, oh, by the way, here's all these visions to make sure Emmett knows that he's going to love Jasper. Like nothing about like her, but just like, she's like, oh, Emmett's going to attack Jasper.
Yeah.
Better add that in.
I pulled up the page to like see exactly what was said, and I love it because like she shows all of these memories and visions to Edward, and then it's Edward who says to Emmett, "This is Alice, Emmett, and part of our family, and that's Jasper. You're gonna love him."
Yeah,
I just love that. Like she's immediately accepted that way, and is just like, "Okay, Emmett, you have to get on board. Everybody else is like,
like poor Emmett, like." Oh my gosh. Literally that like everyone else got like 3 days of her probably like explaining things and talking about it, you know, and then like that Edward got to see everything, and Emmett, it's just like, well, accept it. Rosalie likes him, Edward likes him, he's in, or they're in. So yeah. Yeah, definitely those stories were my favorite parts of the, maybe not the whole section, though they'd be tied, but definitely this chapter. Yeah, we also get kind of the second mention of the Volturi, just very much in passing in this chapter, that Edward references them, but says he doesn't want to like go into all that with Bella. And then beyond that, it's just kind of like romantic, cute interactions like between them. I do think it's really like sweet. The whole section. I also really think it's like so funny that Rosalie, her favorite thing about being immortal is that she gets to be like the bride at her own wedding so many times.
Yes, I love that.
It's like,
I thought that was so funny.
Yeah, so accurate. And then, yeah. And Edward's like, yeah, I don't ever think we can be like, you know, have sex. It's also part of this chapter. What a time.
Yeah, I kind of completely forgot about that because like I read it like 2 weeks ago. That's right.
Yeah. But yeah, that's kind of the chapter. And the other thing that, you know, Bella mentions him singing some unknown tune, and in Edward's POV, we know it is Bella's song that he wrote for her that he's humming, which is cute. I remember that was one of the things I was most excited about in the movie, was to hear what they were going to do for Bella's song, because it's such a big plot point throughout the books. Yeah, anyways.
Yeah.
Yep. But that's the end of my notes for Midnight Sun.
Yeah, I also don't have any other notes really. So
yeah. since we spent a good 40 minutes talking about chapter 13 of Twilight, it's good that we kept it short for these ones.
It all balanced out pretty well, I think.
Yes, it did. All right. We have a few announcements. The first being, what are we reading next week for week 6?
We are reading chapters 15 through 17 in Twilight and 19 through 21 in Midnight Sun, and a little under 20 minutes of the movie. And details of the movie and the order to read is on our Instagram, Glittery Musings. Or TikTok also. I put it on TikTok,
yeah. Yeah, it's pinned on TikTok.
There's also Glittery Musings. So
yes. Yeah.
This is our YouTube. All the things.
Everything.
Except our email, which is glitterymusingspod@gmail.com if you want to tell us your thoughts.
The other big announcement is that we are launching our merch line. And so that should be live by the time you are hearing this episode. And that's going to be on Etsy. We will have links in the bio through our Instagram and or possibly TikTok. I feel like most of you are following us on Instagram right now.
Right now, we don't have enough followers on TikToks to put links in our bio. So
yeah,
if you follow us on TikTok, so we can put links in our bio, please do.
Please. We can maybe just post. Yeah, we could do like a post to clarify the Etsy shop for sure. It will probably be Glittery Musings, but in case that's not available, we'll make sure it's all linked for you. It is kind of like a fun merch line. I've been designing it over the last 2 weeks, and it's really shows my art history nerddom. So it's a lot of it's going to be a lot of iconic famous paintings that are now in the public domain that either have to do with vampires or Twilight or swans. Those are the themes, plus a couple extra bonuses of some Team Charlie and Team Carlisle merch, because they are Amy's favorite men who are underrepresented in the current merch.
It is funny. Callie sent me pictures of the merch that she had designed, and I was like, yeah, I'm definitely getting both the hats that say Team Charlie and Team Carlisle.
Yeah. And the other one is this is the skin of a killer with a little star.
I like that.
So there's it's 90% cool vintage art with Twilight references, 10% just some of our favorite very memeable quotes or things that we feel like we're missing from the general merch already available on Etsy, and primarily because we did not want to do a lot of Twilight stuff based on cover art from another artist, aka whoever designed the actual book covers and movies, and we didn't want to use the face of any actors, all those things that are
want to get sued,
Yeah, and beyond that, I get there's tons of that's available, and just because you can get away with it doesn't mean it's cool. So if you're looking for slim alternative Twilight merch, we'll have that on our Etsy shop, and it means a lot if you support us. If you buy basically one sweatshirt, it covers our hosting fees for the whole month so that we can do a month's worth of content for you. So really buying one thing actually makes a difference to us. And you can think of essentially buy a sweatshirt and you sponsored 1 month of Glittery Musing content. So, and we donated our time, but still. Check it out. The other thing that's really nice about it, I'll just say in the shameless plug we're doing, is that a lot of it is not super obvious Twilight merch. So if you're I'm a fan, but I feel low-key weird about wearing Twilight stuff 20 years later, it's not super obvious. People might ask you what's Glittery Musings or, stuff like that because it has our name on it. But yeah, so you can be a little more under the radar with your fandom. So, clearly not the direction we're going. I keep telling people at work that I have a Twilight podcast and they're like, really? It's pretty funny.
I did was looking at our percentage of listeners, and you're clearly doing the work spreading the word, because I think it was 45% of the listeners in the US are in Colorado.
Nice.
No.
Thanks, Colorado fans. That's so funny.
Followed by like 25% Minnesota. So
okay. Yeah. Still great. Still great.
And some other random places. So it's fun.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks so much, guys, for tuning in for week 5 of the Glittery Musings podcast. We already just gave you all the links, but please follow us on social media, on TikTok. Share this with a friend. We're past the halfway point where it just is more and more encouraging for us to be able to see that people are actually as pumped as we are about this content. Keeps us psyched to keep providing it. So share it, send us emails, follow us, all the things, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.